Like you said, you do have the lifelong tenure in the US Supreme Court, but in the book, you made it explicitly clear that you're not advocating for that. Why is that? I know that two of you at least have a lot of experience looking at the courts in the US as well. So could you shed some light on that?
I think we were thinking it wouldn't. It's actually not also the norm to have life tenure. The United States Supreme Court, was founded over 200 years ago,
Yeah.
and at that time it was founded as certain. There wasn't a lot of precedent, so I don't have a serious opposition to life tenure. I think we are seeing, in the way, at least in my personal opinion, the court is playing out right now, right in the U.S. Supreme Court, that there's gaming where the political parties want to appoint the youngest people, strategic ideologies being appointed, so it could create, a significant, could be significant issues. So it's not that I'm opposed to it. I just think that the more norm would be to have longer time in the court, right? And the way to accomplish a longer period of time would be two ways. One, increase the age of retirement. But two, you could also have a term limit. So you could say most courts, in the Commonwealth courts, they have a retirement age, and maybe 83% have a retirement age higher than the Indian Supreme Court. Those that don't have retirement age have term limits, and most of their term limits are higher than the amount of time the Indian Supreme Court spend, right? Indian Supreme Court justice spent 5 years in average on the court. Nobody would create a 5-year term limit. It's unheard of, right? You would say maybe 10 years, 7 years at minimum. Nobody, if I were creating a court right now, a new country, I wouldn't say, oh yeah, my Supreme Court judges must retire in 5 years. And I think this issue is interconnected to other issues, as you mentioned, one of them. But another is the fact that the age of appointment actually has gone up when the collegium took power. So when we looked at pre-1993, an executive-led system, judges were younger. But it could be, right, then when judges are when lawyers are appointing other lawyers, they think, yes, longer legal practice will make you a better judge. Whereas maybe when non-lawyers or a commission or executive is thinking, well, no, we're just going to pick people for different reasons, right? We'll pick people because they're academics or because they're, been successful in practice, and it's not that they need a large amount of time.
Would you like to add anything to that, Aparna and William?
I guess I'll just say briefly, as an American lawyer myself, looking at some of the proposals in the United States, those proposals for reform involve the concern that life tenure is too long. We should actually create term limits. But I mean, to Sital's point, the term limits that are being discussed for the United States Supreme Court as just potential reform proposals. Just to be clear, there's nothing on the table that's realistically going to become law anytime soon. But the one number, for example, that gets offered in many different contexts is 18 years. So nothing even close to the brevity of a 5 or 7 year tenure on the court that we see in the Supreme Court of India. 18 years would be a dramatic shortening of the tenure that we expect Supreme Court justices in the United States to have, but it'd still be far longer than any of the judges in our data we would expect them to serve. So just to provide some context in that respect. And I guess the other thing I'll say, just maybe more generally about this, is studying the Supreme Court of India as somebody who practiced law only in the United States and has a background of legal study also only in the United States. I'll say it was a very humbling experience for me as an American lawyer, because it's very easy as an American lawyer to look at our own Supreme Court and think that, well, gosh, this must just be what Supreme Courts look like. And one of the things that I learned very quickly when I started looking closely at the Supreme Court of India is all of the ways in which the Supreme Court of India really creates a very different model for what a Supreme Court can be. And if you look at the United States Supreme Court, there's a lot to criticize about it. If you look at the Supreme Court of India, yes, there's a lot to criticize about it, and that's, and our book, you know, identifies some areas of concern there. But with whether you're talking about life tenure being too long in the United States or 5 to 7 years being too short in India, and a larger lesson maybe just is that there really are possibilities for doing things differently than the way they are right now in the courts that you're familiar with, and that those possibilities are worth exploring.
I just want to note that, you know, the experience of Commonwealth countries, common law countries generally, but Commonwealth countries around the world is of particular significance, I think, for India as a common law system, as a bunch of, you know, people who are trying to do something very similar or very often located in the global south. You know, dealing with questions around state capacity, what the role of judges is in a post-colonial society with very often a transformative constitution, so a different conception of judicial review, so on and so forth. If you look at those elements too, we find that in the Indian Supreme Court is no longer the model. India is one of the first such countries and such constitutions, but it's no longer the model in terms of how do you design a Supreme Court. And countries and newer constitutions have moved in different directions, but one of the things that they've tried to do is bring some institutional stability to the top court. And I think that's the question to look at, to see how we could stabilize the top court so that it doesn't just become, as my co-authors mentioned, this kind of a revolving door where people come in for a short period, leave. It has the good effect is that it cannot be very easily captured. And I think some of the concerns that you see playing out in the US don't play out in India because it's a revolving door. But at the same time, it makes it very difficult to institutionalize practices within the Supreme Court.